All right. Hello and welcome to episode 92. It's not quite the 93 to infinity as he referenced in his poetry, which is a great illusion, great reference. But it's a pleasure to have with me for episode 92. And you can see the book to my right shoulder, Pinata Theory, Alan Chazaro. Alan, how are you, sir?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you for having me.
Man, it's great to have you. I've heard great things about you. We've been in touch for a bit. And shoot, what an accomplishment, man. That's a heck of a book, heck of a poetry collection.
Thank you so much.
I'm swimming in it right now, just kind of, finished the last couple of days. And I got a lot of questions and compliments. But it's got I don't know what a Bay Area sound is, but it's got a Bay Area sound.
Yeah, no, I was
You know,
going for that for sure. The Bay Area
right?
vibe, the Bay Area energy, I like to say.
Man, so we're an hour and a half, 2 hours away from each other. I'm up here in Sacktown. Tell me a little bit about growing up in the Bay Area. We talking Oakland? Are we talking suburbs?
No, yeah. So I was born in Redwood City
Okay.
on the peninsula. I grew
Yep.
up predominantly in Mountain View, the suburbs just north of San
Uh-huh.
Jose.
Okay.
Yeah, so my parents were Mexican immigrants and they just coincidentally landed in the Bay Area. There was no family. It was just
Hmm.
my dad lived in the capital of Veracruz. It's called Jalapa,
Okay.
and it's a university city, right? So it's kind of cosmopolitan. It kind of reminds me of like some alter version of Berkeley, but in Mexico, which is pretty
Ah.
dope. So there's a lot of like hippies and
Right.
just kind of like counterculture,
Uh,
and there's a big international student presence, or at least there used to be when my dad was, in the '60s in his hippie days and whatnot.
okay.
So he met somebody, a hippie basically, from the Bay that had heard about this place and was down there, and then they had
Mm,
family down there. Just one of those weird sort of cosmic
right.
connections that just ended up here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up in Mountain View predominantly, and I like to say pre-Google Mountain View
Right.
because the
Yeah.
Mountain View I grew up in, it was still suburban, don't get me wrong, but there
Uh-huh.
was way more people of color. And my neighborhood specifically, there was a huge apartment complex at the end that was like puro Latino. Food trucks would come by. You had the bounce houses and the music going.
Uh,
And by the time I had finished high school
mm-hmm.
and moved into college, that was already becoming gentrified. Where
Wow.
now, when you go back, I think there's my family and one family that I grew up with, another Latino family, and we're the only ones left that I recognize.
Wow.
99% new, like transplants, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are tech workers. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of them are Asian or international, which is
Mm-hmm.
dope in its own way.
Sure.
But there's definitely been a turnover of the Mountain View that I know.
Wow.
So yeah, so that was like my teenage years. And then the East Bay connection is my wife is from East Oakland and her
Okay.
grandma's from Hayward in the East Bay.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was a teenager, I met her at UC Berkeley.
Nice.
And shout out community college because I also went to community college
Nice.
at Foothill in the South Bay
Oh
area.
yeah. Oh yeah.
And so I kind of, high school for me was a mess, and I lived in a single parent home, and
Mm.
I didn't have a lot of the academic guidance growing up, so I got
Sure.
into like graffiti, hip hop, a lot of things that the kids that I knew were all kids of immigrants, and all
Mm-hmm.
of our parents were working, or we had one parent at home. So when we got home, we were never doing homework. It was
Mm-hmm.
playing football, playing basketball. As we got older, smoking, video games, cutting class, and all that led to just that sort of like hip hop lifestyle, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, once I got to Berkeley, I met my wife, and I've been in the East Bay ever since. So
Nice.
yeah, we're up in San Pablo now, all the way up on the other edge of the Bay
Okay.
Area universe, and we've been here for a while.
Yeah. Okay. Oh man, a lot to unpack there, a lot to talk about. So,
Yeah,
well, no, so Mountain View. So my family's from San Jose. A lot of my family,
nice
and I feel like I kind of know Mountain View, but you're right. I mean, obviously, I think of like gentrification, like San Francisco,
for
but of
sure.
course, right? Your Mountain View. I don't think a lot of people know about Palo Alto other
For
than
sure.
Stanford, right? I mean,
Yeah,
East Palo Alto. I know gentrification is a big issue there as well. I appreciate you bringing that up. It is suburban Mountain View, like you said, but
for
you
sure.
said it's different. It's a different place now, huh?
Yeah, so when I was growing up, most of my friends were Latino immigrants,
Mm.
or Filipino, Black,
Mm.
Samoan,
Right.
Vietnamese, right? Like all of
Right.
these different groups of friends that I had. I had one like white friend basically growing up, like in my inner circle of friends in the neighborhood.
Right.
And none of those families are there still. Not a single one can afford to
Yeah.
live there anymore. And
Yeah.
that obviously was a process that started over 10 years ago.
Sure.
Little by little, people started moving out. Homes started getting bought for millions of dollars. But
Hmm.
I mean, I feel like I was on the front lines because I lived right next to the freeway 101,
Hmm.
and next to like the military base, and Google basically moved in across the street.
Right.
So it was like a very direct impact of, I think I saw the first waves of gentrification, to be honest, in Mountain View.
Hmm.
For whatever like small population of immigrant families there were, they couldn't keep up with the rising cost of living that
Yeah.
you know we've all experienced since then, I think, in the region.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt. Front lines. You're right, man. I mean, Google was, yeah. Wow. Thanks for putting that in perspective. Appreciate
For
that.
sure.
What were you, what were you reading as a kid? What were you into? What was your relationship with language? I mean, did you grow up bilingual? Was it
Mhm.
monolingual with Spanglish?
It was a mix. So,
Yeah.
like I said, because my mom never lived with me, so to me that's a key detail because they say
Mm.
that the mother language is passed through the mother.
Right.
So my dad was very much more of like an assimilationist, where I think he wanted to fit in with American culture and white
Mm-hmm.
culture and sort of
Mm-hmm.
suburban culture. So he spoke to us in English, but because he would always have his friends over, like I would overhear them always speaking Spanish. Or when my
Uh-huh.
mom would stop by, like they would speak Spanish, right? So
Uh-huh.
I never took a Spanish class in my life, but
Huh.
I can speak pretty decently and I understand like 100% because I was always around it, and all my
Sure.
friends were Mexican or some form of Central American,
Uh-huh.
mostly. So in their homes, that's all I heard, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mainly spoke English growing up, and just over the years, as I grew older, I wanted to learn more about like speaking Spanish actively.
Mm-hmm.
So I started studying more and traveling more to Mexico and things like that. But in terms of literature, so
Mm.
there was, like I said, there was really no like scholastic or academic
Yeah.
environment in my home. My dad was working, and my older brother was, just around, right? And there was very little guidance. A lot of like sort of male friends constantly around, right? My sister
Mm.
never lived with me. My mom never lived with me.
Mm.
My dad never like really had a woman in the house since my mom left. So it was like pretty much sports like 24/7,
A
video games, like
lot of dudes.
a lot of dudes, man. And I think that's, a key part of who I am, and sort of the
Mm.
things I write about because,
Mm-hmm.
in middle school, like we were boxing each other and,
Yep.
playing flag football or tackle football or playing
Mm-hmm.
basketball. Like I was just one of those kids that was always like, prided myself on like my speed and my agility and sort of athleticism, to the point where I broke my foot playing basketball recently. So I still sadly cling to that, right? So that was very much a glue for us, as opposed to
Mm.
like knowledge or homework or
Sure.
encouragement, right? So I was kind of in that group of kids that was just kind of neglected by teachers, and I wasn't doing my part either. So I flunked eighth grade. I struggled through high school, got kicked out
Mm.
of different programs, and sort of crawled my way to a 2.3 GPA, which I thought
Right.
was like amazing and isn't
Mm.
that bad. But
Yeah.
yeah, enrolled in community college, and I would say my like relationship with language came from my sister's grandfather.
Okay.
She had a different father, obviously,
Mm.
and he was a white dude, and he was way more like, he would take me to museums, and he would
Mm.
like put me onto books. And I remember when I was like in community college, I would go to his house. He actually lived in Palo Alto,
Okay.
and I would read with him, and he'd be like, "What do you want to read?" And I'd bring like some Black Panther stuff, and he was like a very
Dang.
generous older gentleman that really, I think he was the one that kind of instilled in me that sense of literary interest that none of my friends had.
Mm.
And I'm so like grateful for that experience because I feel like that was my access into like this different world almost, where
Yeah.
I would go with him, and he would like, yeah, like I said, take me to museums and like read me Steinbeck. And
Mm.
even though my mom left that husband, like I stayed in connection with. I was calling him grandpa, right? And I would go to his house,
Uh,
and he was the one that I think saw my creative output that I was putting into like graffiti and all these other things,
sure.
and I think he kind of like helped direct that into this sort of like formal academic space. I
Yeah.
just didn't know it then,
Mm.
so I always credit him as kind of being like somebody that just exposed me to that reality of like literature, art, that I just wasn't really getting elsewhere, to be honest, in that formal sense.
Man, that is so cool. What a cool image of you reading, at age what, 10,
Yeah,
12, reading a book,
yeah, pretty
reading
much.
14, 15.
Yeah, and
What was he reading when you were reading about, Freddie Hampton?
he would let me choose whatever. So I would often choose, yeah, like Fred Hampton,
Yeah.
Eldridge Cleaver,
Mhm.
Sanika Shakur, who was a much later writer. He wasn't a Black Panther, but he was like one of the original Crips, and like
Oh, yeah,
it was
yeah,
just
yeah.
fun. So Grandpa was like a very open-minded human being. Like
Yeah.
he vibed with everybody. Like he didn't discriminate, and I
Mhm.
think his tenderness in viewing the world and wanting to learn about everything around him filtered down to me. And I didn't
Yeah.
realize that until I was obviously much older and in
Mhm.
adulthood.
Mhm.
He's no longer here, but like I would still visit him in the hospital in his last days, and I would
Mhm.
like read to him and stuff like that. And it created that deep like intellectual curiosity in me, and also
Mhm.
that fearlessness of like constantly wanting to learn from other people despite any differences or similarities.
Right.
And I think he sort of instilled in me that like poetic drive and that poetic eye, and just sort of being aware of what's around you and asking questions, right? And
Sure.
just picking up a book and wondering what's in this. I definitely got that from him.
Wow. That's so cool. One of the things that I really appreciate about your collection is that you ask questions. I mean, some poems are half questions or three
Yeah.
quarters questions, and it's like, and of course that stimulates a lot of thinking and your own answers and subjectivity and que en paz descanse. What a great
Yeah.
tribute you are to him. That's so cool.
Yeah.
This idea of, and that to me is really, very Bay Area, very
Mhm.
open. I mean, obviously, every area has its issues,
For sure.
but open, and just that history you talk, I mean, the
Mhm.
Black Panthers and just progressive and activists,
Mhm.
um, and music, man.
Definitely.
So are you like Spice One and Ant Banks era? Are you like Mac Dre and Keek the Sneak or
Yeah. I'm more
E40?
like Mac Dre, Keek the Sneak era in terms of
Okay.
like, when I was in high school and what was getting played at the parties and stuff.
Hmm.
But the earliest thing that I ever remember sonically was in our apartment living room, and my dad wasn't there, and my brother had the radio on, and
Mm.
it was "Sprinkle Me" by E40. That's
Yeah.
my earliest memory of ever hearing
Uh-huh.
like a song in my head.
Uh-huh.
I don't know how old I was, but I think that was like 94, 95. So I was probably like 6 or 7 years old. And I
Okay.
just always remember that. And that was like the song of the year, like
Yeah.
106. And back then it was like Wild 107 or something like that, I think.
Okay.
And they played way more like rap
Uh.
as opposed to like pop now. Yeah, so that was like my introduction to like expression and
Mhm.
music and poetry. Honestly, I credit
Mhm.
hip hop because
Hmm.
after that it was like Tupac, and then shortly after that was Machiavelli.
Uh-huh.
Like that was my like early introduction. The Loonies, like
Oh yeah, of course.
yeah. So those like big hits, Drew
Yeah.
Down, like those are just some of the names from the '90s that I.
Yeah.
Again, when you're a kid, it's just on the radio, but once
Sure.
you get older, you look back and you're like, man, I
Yeah.
know that song by memory because I heard
Yeah.
it so many times.
Yeah. I am by no means an expert, by no means, but I got two hot takes for you there.
Uh,
One is I got five on it is like a 10 out of 10 song,
for sure.
but I got five on it remix is like a
Oh, I was gonna say,
13
yeah,
out of 10, right?
for sure, for sure.
And then my second one is that Master P never did better stuff than he did when he was with in
Mm,
the Bay Area with TRU.
true. That's
I
that's a
don't know
good
how
piece
hot
of
that take is.
knowledge. No, it's
Okay.
it's a great take on Master P. People always forget that he was, living in Richmond, and he actually opened No Limit Records, the physical record shop, not
Uh-huh.
the record label, in Richmond, California.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, he had a record label or the record shop out here. I want to say it
Yeah.
was like 91.
Wow.
And he sort of, got his game out here like a lot of
Hmm.
rappers and artists and people in general
Yeah.
do. And then he flipped it to New Orleans. And from what I've heard, the Bay Area doesn't really rock with Master P because he never really gave that love back, or he never really like
Ooh.
credited the Bay as
Okay.
much as he,
Sure.
other rappers are a little more vocal, but that's just what
Yeah.
what I've heard from different
Yeah. Yeah.
people.
Yeah. I hear you, man. Your Twitter handle is like what, Pocho Boy Meets World,
Yeah.
which is a great reference, by the way.
Mhm.
But so can you explain a little bit about Pocho? I mean, do you feel like that at one time was a negative that's like kind of been reclaimed? Like, how do you see that?
Definitely, yeah. So pocho is a term that's used by predominantly Mexican people, and when I say Mexican, I mean people living in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
I'm, Mexican heritage. I'm Mexican American. I
Sure.
usually identify as like Californian.
Mm.
So when I go to Mexico, and I should also give you the context that my mom currently lives in Mexico, and
Mm.
my abuelo, basically everybody lives in Mexico besides my dad, my brother, and one of my aunts.
Ah,
So when I go back, it's 99% of my family, right? And I'm
yeah.
the American one. I'm the Americanized one. I'm the
Mhm.
pocho, the gringo, whatever. So those are like phrases that I heard growing up often by my like similar age cousins that would
Okay.
one of us. You're not really Mexican.
Uh-huh.
You're American. You're pocho. So pocho is very much a derogatory term
Mhm.
used for people like me. We're born or predominantly raised in the U.S.
Mhm.
But a few years ago, this poet from Fresno, Sara Borjas,
Yeah.
wrote a book that came out with Noemi Press, I believe. And she really was using the word bocha like super strongly. And it
Uh-huh.
kind of empowered me at the
Okay.
time to be like, you know what? We should actually reclaim that word and use it for
Uh-huh.
ourselves. Like,
Yeah.
I am a pocho. I am this like
Right.
third iteration. I'm not this side and
Mhm.
I'm not that side. I'm a
Mhm.
combination. A
Sure.
mezcla. I'm a mix.
Sure.
And I sort of began to take pride in that because I could one of my biggest privileges on this planet is I can move through multiple borders in ways that a
Right.
lot of my friends growing up were undocumented and they still can't go back to Mexico.
Mhm.
Or they can't come up to the United States if they got sent back. So I think because I grew up so close to that culture, as I got older, I started to perceive my citizenship as a strength, and Pochoism is a part of citizenship,
Okay.
um, because we get to maneuver this third space that not everybody gets to maneuver in and exist in.
Right. Oh man. Well, I'm even more excited. I'm gonna talk to Sarah in I think in a couple weeks.
Oh, let's go. She's my
Yeah.
favorite, honestly.
Oh, that's so cool. I'm so excited. Definitely. Have you ever read the book called Pocho by I think it's Viejo Real?
You know what's funny, dude? I don't think I have, but I want to say I've seen it like on bookshelves and stuff, but I don't think I've ever read
Oh.
it.
I mean, I just obviously, I mean, it's so good because obviously there's a singularity there that a pocho like yourself or self-named would really understand.
Mhm,
Myself not the children of immigrants necessarily, but just the idea of living in two worlds.
mhm.
And it actually takes place in the Bay, man. It takes place in like
Oh,
Santa
really?
Clara, San Jose.
Dang, that's
Um,
crazy.
I read it probably the first time in like a junior in high school, but I don't,
Yeah,
never too old for it. I would highly
definitely,
recommend it.
definitely. I remember
Um,
seeing it a lot. I just looked it up in the cover.
yeah.
I've seen it everywhere, and for whatever reason, I just
Mm-hmm.
never got to it.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So I was gonna ask you, give me some what were you reading? Maybe you got more into high school and
Mhm,
college that really thrilled you. The Chills at Will podcast idea of like, man,
yeah.
I want to listen to this again and again, the song, or I want to read this again and again. And then I guess kind of related is, did you feel represented in what you read when you were growing up?
Mm. So, like, definitely the middle school and high school era, I didn't really read too much besides of occasionally going to grandpa's house. Like I said, I
Mm-hmm.
was, like getting F's, and I took summer school every single year from
Mm-hmm.
I think seventh grade to 12th grade. I was
Mm-hmm.
taking not only one, but like often two classes.
Yeah.
So, like, I was always playing catch up. When I was a senior, I was in literally a high school senior enrolled in freshman level classes. So,
Mm.
that just kind of gives you a picture of how like academically disengaged I was and how behind I was. So it wasn't until I'm trying to think of like some of the first books I read. I already mentioned Monster by Sanika Shakur was like a
Yep.
super
Yep.
pivotal text for me.
Mm-hmm.
Always Running by Luis J. Rodriguez was also a pretty big text for me. And those were the first times that I felt some level of seeing. Not that I had grown up as wildly as they had, but
Sure.
just to see like a male of color
Mm.
who somehow felt disconnected from institutions and sort of neglected in these like academic environments.
Mm.
That resonated with me more than what I was being assigned in class. Um, and community college for me was definitely like the light bulb, I guess you could say, where I kind of started putting everything together. Like I was
Mm-hmm.
listening to the hieroglyphics over here,
Yeah.
and then I would pick up, like a text over here about like Chicano rights, let's say.
Mm.
And I started to merge those worlds more and started to see that they were very similar. So I took all this database and this library that I'd been collecting about hip hop, which to me was very much about empowerment
Mm.
and sort of positivity and community and uplifting. Like I was very much into that style of hip hop,
Mm-hmm.
like Latif the Truth Speaker, people
Sure.
like that. And I started applying it to text. Early poet, like the earliest poet I could say that I felt got the chills from was probably Martin Espada, who's a Puerto Rican poet from New
Okay.
York. and he was writing a lot about going to Puerto Rico as an American, as you know, somebody from the US, and sort of feeling that culture clash.
Hmm.
And then he would go back and write these poems about growing up on the East Coast as a Puerto Rican. And I started to feel like these stronger parallels.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to sort of like follow his breadcrumbs, you know, through
Sure.
across poetry specifically. And I read, I think he has like, I don't know, 12 collections or something now. And
Okay.
I probably read like 6 of them
Mm.
in that time span.
Hmm. Did you just post about Martin Espada today? I literally feel like I just saw it on social media.
I
Like
wish I did, dude. I
I,
didn't, but whoever did, shout him out.
I swear I really did. I really did. I probably heard the name being thrown around, but I'm picturing right now like
Yeah,
yeah, wow,
I
crazy.
need to. I need to.
Yeah.
He was pivotal for me for sure.
Oh, very interesting. Was like the whole like knowing about knowing. Like did you, when you were, let's say, 12, 14, would you have like been able to amplify, or not amplify, would you been able to communicate the fact that you didn't feel represented, or was it more
Definitely
like,
not.
when you saw that you're like, oh, this is what I've been missing?
Yeah, I think it was a mix of that. So like,
Uh-huh.
again, I went to like a good suburban school with like, you know, really top level instructors, and you know, it was like well organized and things. So
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't doing my part either, to be honest. But um, yeah, I don't know. I think my way of like expressing myself was like cutting class or
Mm.
not doing the homework.
Mm.
Those are like my little rebellions, I
Right,
guess.
right.
Not just mine, like all of my friends. And it was also some of like the cultural like peer pressure thing where
Mm-hmm.
you know, growing up in the 90s and like early thousands in the Bay Area as like, you know, a kid of color in a predominantly white school, you know, you did feel like a minority and you felt like you were sitting in the back of the classes, and you didn't feel like the curriculum really reflected what you were maybe
Mm-hmm.
seeing at home or seeing at your friends' houses or
Mm.
listening to or watching. And
Right.
so yeah, I think my form of resistance, which is very self-destructive, and I feel like the system is designed to do this actually,
Mm.
is was to sort of for me to like what's that word when you like self-destroy or sort of
I know what you mean.
yeah,
Your
yeah, like
self-destructive tendency kind of thing, like
exactly, and kind
yeah.
of, you know, in an academic sense in my case.
Okay.
So yeah, it was not something I ever articulated or could
Mm-hmm.
articulate. I
Mm-hmm.
think I just felt it through the music, through the hip hop, through these texts that I eventually started picking up,
Mm-hmm.
and through graffiti. I did graffiti growing up. So in high school, I was like one of the kids where people would come to me to be like, "Hey, can you tag my name?" You know, and I think
Mm.
for me, that visual art was like my coming out as an artist, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Before I could get to that like poetry and literary phase, I kind of went
Sure.
through it through like the visual graffiti stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, I mean, does that mean, you're listening to like I don't know, Brenda's Got a Baby, or like, one of Tupac's really like deep songs alongside like a club banger party one,
Yeah,
you
pretty
know?
much, dude. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a good way to
yeah,
put it.
yeah.
And then graffiti, am I like kind of like oversimplifying? Is it kind of like, man, like, everybody wants to be known, especially teenagers, right? Young
Mhm.
people. Like, is it kind of like, man, I'm like, that's my name up there. That's me. Like,
Definitely.
is that a good reading of it?
100%. A lot of it
Yeah.
was just about, again, just the word I was looking for, by the way, was self-sabotage.
Yes, 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 yes.
Like I was very self-sabotaging at that stage,
Mm-hmm.
but I also didn't have the tools to like dismantle that. So
Mm-hmm.
graffiti was one of my earliest and first tools.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was very much, I think at the core, it was more about feeling like just this sense of identity. Like, you know, again, it's cliche as a teenager to be like, I exist. I just painted my name on this tunnel or under this bridge or on a train
Mm-hmm.
with my friends. Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
here, we're alive, we matter
Right,
kind of
right, right,
thing.
right, right.
But minus the political stuff and just kind of in this very like impetuous sort of like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
not destructive, but just kind of like could be seen as like this sort of negative thing. But for me, it was a very like liberating, empowering. It
Right.
wasn't about destroying things. It was about like creating me, you know?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, you taught high school. It's like
Mhm.
I'm gonna wear like loud socks, or I'm gonna wear
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna show out in some way, and
Yeah.
and if it's graffiti, if it's all kinds of different things. And thank you. The word I was looking for was articulated, what you just said.
Mm,
What I was asking, like, would you have been able to articulate it at an earlier
mm.
time? As we get into the more recent times, who you've been reading that just again thrilled you? Who are whether poets or not? lyricists? I mean, who've really you just been like, wow, this writing is incredible.
Yeah, man, I'm like so scattered now. I think part of it is the social media world, which I just
Yeah.
started using social media recently. Like I
Oh,
just
okay.
got Instagram this year,
Ah,
and I feel like it's kind of fragmented the way that I approach the world, which is both good and bad. So I just kind of see things and I sort of take whatever comes at me that day more than
yeah.
I used to, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, or even a
Hmm.
couple years ago. One of the people that I've discovered recently is Overcast. He's a rapper from Oakland.
Okay.
And I've been really vibe. I'm one of those people that like, if not day to day, week to week, and definitely month to month, I'm on to the next thing, and I'm
Uh-huh.
constantly like searching for just some new energy or some new
Right.
voice or artistic sort of presence that just stimulates me and that I feel
Mm-hmm.
connected to for in whatever capacity that looks like. So
Mm-hmm.
the past week and a half, it's definitely been Overcast. Very like melodic, peaceful, introspective,
Uh-huh.
poetic rapper from Oakland, which completely contrasts to the other stuff that I listen to, which is like Offset Jim, who just came out with. He's another Oakland rapper, right? And
Okay.
I'll listen to those guys back to back, and one is just super aggressive, like street life and all this
Huh.
like banging bass and all that, and then this other guy's like super gentle, talking about love and how his nephew was just born, and these very
Huh.
like tender songs, right? And they come from
Sure.
the same city.
Yeah.
So I try to occupy like all ends of the spectrum as much as I can,
Mm-hmm.
and I try not to like discriminate, I guess, on what artists or what sort of like
Right.
writer is entering my state.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Um, so as you got into like, as you got, you talked about your time at Foothill and then Berkeley and all that. Like, I mean, that's obviously a big time jump, and congrats. That's obviously a very esteemed, institution. And then you did MFA at USF, is that right?
Yeah, I eventually did MFA. So I finished Berkeley, and then I taught high school for 6 years, and then
Ah, okay.
then I went back to get my master's.
Nice. Let's go Dons. Both of my parents are
Yeah,
grads.
nice. Oh,
Class of
word, nice,
class of
dude.
1972, baby.
Sick, sick.
So what was like was a Eureka moment or multiple Eureka moments when you're like, man, I can like this can become a book. Like people like my stuff, people dig my stuff, people vibe with my stuff. Like when did that hit you?
It was very incremental and progressive, and I had different moments. I think again, first it came through the graffiti, and then it came through like freestyling at parties and stuff. Like, so I started, of course, like every other kid, I made some like rap songs and stuff, and every time I did something, people would like gravitate towards it. I guess you could say, like
Mm-hmm.
people would give me respect for it, or would
Mm-hmm.
show love for it,
Mm-hmm.
or really be like, this is actually pretty good, right?
Yeah.
And I think that gave me the confidence eventually to do it in literature, where I just felt like there was not a book that truly represented
Mm-hmm.
the way that I sort of grew up. Like I was telling you, in like this multi-dimensional reality where I was going to this old white dude's house in Palo Alto, even though he had no blood or even legal relation to me at that point in my life. But then also going to like Richmond, my wife's family, and then going back to Mountain View, and then taking the BART
Mm-hmm.
to San Francisco for class. And then I was just really all over the map in the Bay, and I
Yeah.
saw so many different stratifications of life, of privilege, of
Mm.
just, like from the top to the bottom. Like I could just really see it helped me understand how I fit in this like wild landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to like kind of really like pinpoint the coordinates of where I existed among all of this and write that book.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it kind of feels like when I listen to other creative people, especially because I am really obsessed with hip hop, like I'll listen to a lot of rappers like Nipsey Hussle and whoever talk about, like I'll listen to interviews about them talk about how
Mm.
they got into music and why, and often it just comes from they felt like their story hadn't been told, and that's why they started
Mm.
recording music. And I just found that poetry was my way to do that, and to sort of give,
Mm-hmm.
this is my album, this is my mixtape, this is my way of saying like,
Yeah.
this is where I come from, so other
Mm-hmm.
people can access and experience and learn about that.
Mm. Do any of your ciphers exist on YouTube?
No, I don't think they do, man. If they do, I'll send it. I do have a SoundCloud though. I have one song that I put up
Ah,
like 5 or 6 years ago, and
nice.
it's actually not bad. Like I
Uh-huh.
had a CD full of some stuff that I did about 10 years ago, and
Uh-huh.
You know, the students and people that I've shared it with, like close friends, they were all like, of course they're gonna be like, oh, this is good, but
Yeah.
like I'll go back and I'm a hip hop head, dude. If something
Uh-huh.
sucks, I'll be like, this is not it.
Right.
I'm like, I feel like I had some bars actually, and I had a sense of rhythm. But I think that's what happens when you grow up listening to it
Yeah.
and you grow up loving it.
Yeah.
And I'm just constantly a person of language and ideation. So
Sure.
it was kind of a natural thing for me to just hop into a cipher and freestyle with people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I never thought I was gonna blow up or anything. So I just kind of dropped that quickly and was like, let me try, something else.
Well, yeah, I mean, I love, I love to hear more. I love, hear you live when COVID's over and all that. Like, you got, the sound quality just on the page, just the way you do the format and, the repetition, all kinds of things like that.
Mhm.
When you would do like freestyles, is that more about like wordplay, like cleverness, or is it like trying to get like something deep?
It was a mix. I think I tend to go off on the deep end, and I think that's why poetry became a space where I could interrogate the
Hmm.
depths of everything around me. But generally, it was just trying to like just piece together like some a nice sequence of language that sounded good, even if it
Hmm.
didn't always fully make sense,
Yeah.
and to get people's head nods and just to get those one or two punchlines that you kind
Yeah.
of like could feel coming when the other dude was ciphering. Like I was already
Okay.
thinking like I'm gonna start with these three bars, and then from there I'm just gonna run
Uh,
with it and start looking
cool.
around and seeing what I can do. But
Yeah.
to me, it was the cipher is very much just about like this passing of like feeling and energy and just
Hmm.
positive momentum.
Hmm.
And even when you mess up, people just pick it up right back and nobody says anything.
Cool.
Versus battling, which I never was really into
Ah,
because that's
okay.
a much more like superiority and I'm gonna assert my
Yeah.
dominance. Like I was too
Yeah.
chill for that.
Right.
I was definitely in the back, just like let's just get this going as a group and like
Cool.
have a good vibe basically.
Yeah. Okay. Um, do you remember Doug Christie who played for the Kings back in the
Yeah,
day?
of course, man.
Okay.
Hell yeah.
So you talk about having bars, and I don't doubt it for a minute. I have, I think, singular, maybe like a bar. So my line was my line was sipping on Chris with tea like Doug, play me bass line and I'll dunk on your mug.
Nice, man.
Eh? Eh?
That's Sacramento
You know,
916. Macramento.
right. Uh, I swear to you, one time too, I flew in from LA to Sacramento, and I swear to you, the stewardess said, "Welcome to Macramento." I swear. I
Wanna,
swear.
like, dap that
No,
person,
no
give them a
recordings
hug.
exist. Yeah, no recordings exist, but I think it happened, man.
That's so
Oh
funny.
man. So help me with the timeline on the Frank Ocean collection. Was that like right after USF? During? Was that
Yeah.
like, yeah, how did that work?
So I went back to grad school in 2015, and it was a 2.5 year program roughly. So I
Okay.
basically graduated in 2018.
Hmm.
During that time, I had written Piñata Theory and a good amount of Frank Ocean. And
Hmm.
through Piñata Theory, I found this sort of like subset of poems and sort of threads that I felt like could exist on its own. Again, I was
Mm.
very much using like the album to mixtape model.
Yeah.
So Frank Ocean, I was seeing as like this sort of like an EP, right? Like a smaller project that I
Okay.
could release with a few tracks or poems, and
Hmm.
that came out in 2019. And Pinata Theory was also already written at that point, pretty much. So
Hmm.
when I submitted Pinata Theory and Frank Ocean to Black Lawrence Press, who ended up publishing it, they both got picked up at the exact same time in two separate competitions from the same press. One was a full
Whoa.
length, and one was a chapbook.
Okay.
And completely different judging panels, completely different editors and everything. And when they called me, they said it's never happened before where the editor of this team was like, "Yo, like we got this book over here that we want to run." And the other editor was like, "Oh, really? Like we got this book." And when they like consulted, they're like, "Oh, damn, it's the same guy."
That's
So it's kind
cool.
of like a
Wow.
crazy coincidence of just hard work and opportunity kind of intersecting for me.
Yeah.
And so we planned it strategically where we're like, okay, well, if you're going to run both of my books, let's do the small one first, and
Mm.
then a year later we'll release Pinata Theory, and that's what we
Oh,
did, just
cool.
exactly almost a year apart.
Cool. I mean, you've talked about like a like longer like background. It wasn't like you just one day were like, I'm gonna write this book. Like
Mhm.
these seeds were germinating for years, and all the creative pursuits you talk about. Was there like a I mean, you talk about the thread, or were there some seeds that you could point to though that were like, okay, now it's time to put this down on the page?
Yeah, definitely. I think having gone from like the experience I had in academia into community college, and then, like you said, really just kind of out of nowhere almost, like I just supercharged myself and just
Mm,
was like, I need to get my shit together. Like I have no my so one of my best friend growing up got deported around college. And I
mm,
think things like that kind of opened my eyes to be like, I don't have any excuse to not be succeeding. Like
mm,
I am again, I was I realized that I was self-sabotaging. Even though there were systemic things in place, I think that
sure.
encouraged certain people to self-destruct in a little more quickly, right? Or a little more efficiently.
Mm,
I sort of caught myself at this pivotal intersection where I was like, I'm still young enough, like I can still make this happen. I want to do this. I want to feel good about what I'm doing with my life. So um I kind of like gave up graffiti and sort of doing all I stopped smoking and doing a lot of little like just juvenile stuff, right?
mm,
Nothing crazy, but
mhm,
all the things that were distracting me. So I would go to Mexico, spent time with my family, and I started just that's when I first started writing my own stuff, was when I kind
mm,
of was making this transition from my older self and then going back to my family in Mexico and
mm,
just seeing the rawness of life in another country where like
mm,
some places literally I know it's cliche, but like literally don't have running water or you have to
right,
like shower with a bucket or
right.
flush the toilet of shit with a bucket of water and that was your everyday
Yeah,
reality.
right.
That kind of made me realize like I have a beautiful life in the Bay Area and I want to
Mm,
like utilize every ounce of it, every drop.
mm,
I want to enjoy it and then give that feeling to other people. So
mhm,
that's really where my writing started happening. And then I also just want to quickly shout out June Jordan's Poetry for the People program.
mm,
It's a community program at UC Berkeley that I took where it's a mix of undergrad students, graduate students, and community members that don't have to pay for it, that don't even
okay.
have to be enrolled in any, Berkeley level anything.
Mhm,
And we all just wrote poetry together and workshopped. And I think
wow.
it all like combined for me in those years, those two
Yeah.
years.
Oh, man. Very cool. What did it feel like the first time to see your name on a book jacket?
It was pretty crazy. But it's weird because ever since I made that transition from like slacker to scholar, basically, like I kind of I think because I grew up again like watching sports and like playing sports and things like that, I kind of always had that competitive drive and I was
Mm,
always one of those people that was like if I say I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. And it was I think by the time I came out with the book, I had hit so many of my goals that seemed so far out of reach for me as growing up as a youth that I honestly felt like anything was possible and I still really
mm,
do.
mm,
And I think that's why I also went into teaching to like give young people that sort of like energy. But
yeah.
yeah, kind of. I know it sounds weird, but I felt like it was something that just felt like it was meant to be.
Yeah.
It was only like a matter of time. Once it happened, I was like, this feels like where I'm supposed to be right now.
Hey, Kevin Garnett said it, right?
Yeah,
Anything is possible.
yeah, yeah.
Man. Man. Um, did you have to like learn how to write? Like, I mean, what I love about poetry is that it doesn't need a form necessarily. I mean, would you call your work prose poetry? Like, I
Um,
guess just the idea of like how much do you think about form?
Not too much. Like the thing I like about poetry is that it's a very fluid genre and
Mm-hmm.
craft where you have poems that are like upside down and you have poems that are just a bunch of semicolons
Yeah.
that are different sizes on the page, right? And like really experimental shit, which
Yeah.
I've grown to appreciate over time. I rejected it earlier, but now I
Mm,
like kind of understand the beauty and the process of just experimentation of language and like
mm-hmm.
deconstruction of language. And
Sure.
you know what I mean? You can't really write an essay or a novel that does that. Only poetry really allows that freedom and that range and that
Mm-hmm.
multitude of your expression through the written language
Mm-hmm.
or through sound.
Mm,
So I don't really think about form too much, but there are times where I'm like, okay, I've been writing in this experimental state of mind for 3 weeks. Poetry also does have the beauty of form and structure. So I would go and
mm-hmm.
be like, let me try writing a sestina or something. So I would use form as sort of like to sort of reground me if I felt like I was getting too up in the clouds.
Okay.
Because I feel like that can also alienate the readers that I wanted to reach sometimes
Mm-hmm.
to go too far off into the experimental side.
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely a good mix. I mean, like, we talking about Jose Hernandez Diaz, who's a
Yeah.
great writer out of SoCal, and he's got great things to say about you, and I know vice versa. Like
Yeah.
to me, like I would say, he's prose poetry for sure. Like
For
if I'm
sure.
teaching prose poetry, yours has a lot of that, but it's not maybe that far on the spectrum type of thing.
definitely.
Did did the titles come first and then the work, or vice versa, or depends?
It sort of depends, but I feel like I am a title person in general.
Yeah.
Like I operate off sensory, image, feeling, sound, memory,
Hmm.
miniature fabrics that I'm given by the world through whatever capacity. So like I have a serape blanket right next to me. You know, those very colorful, beautiful blankets from Mexico. And just that word serape, I might say, and like the idea of colors being great, like the gradation of colors,
Mm.
I might want to just be like, you know what, when I get off this call with Peter, I'm gonna write a poem titled Serape, and I'm gonna see where that leads.
Huh.
And I tend to operate like that as a writer in general, but especially in poetry, where
Mm.
I might look up what is the history of the serape,
Mm.
where are serapes most common in what region of Mexico, and then
Mm.
that just kind of leads me down all these associative paths that,
Sure.
yeah, again, poetry gives the freedom and the space to like liberate all of those directions at once.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
usually how I operate now. But when I first started writing poetry, it was very more like thematic. Like I want to write a
Uh-huh.
poem about how great immigrants are, or like just kind of didactic, I guess.
Sure.
Now I
Yeah.
operate off concept.
Yes. Awesome. I appreciate that. Sorry, what do they call it? Intellectual property, public domain. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm gonna write that poem called Serape. Sorry
yeah,
about
you
that.
should, dude.
In about 20 minutes. Sorry about that, man.
It's all good, man.
Whoever's first, may the best man win.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, you have some really great titles, and they're very, you know, there's strong imagery for sure. How to watch Mexico soccer is one of them. There's more to it, but there's even one, and I can't remember the name right now. But like the title bleeds right into the actual poem,
Mm,
and that's just such a cool way. I could see how that'd be such a springboard for your ideas, huh?
for sure, definitely.
Yeah. Translation. Are you just like, man, why would I translate? I mean, there's some Spanglish. There's one poem that is todo en español.
Yeah.
Is that somewhere it's like, this is the translation would ruin it? It doesn't need it. Is that kind of the way you think, or how do
Yeah, I
you see
think
the
so.
translation?
One of my big, I guess, I don't know if principles is the right word, but
Hmm.
I guess some one of my operating ways as a poet is that I really try to like let the poems and the language exist in their like truest state and their most
Mm.
organic state, because I
Sure.
feel like that's what I want the reader to feel, is like, where was I at that moment?
Mm.
How was I feeling? What headspace was I in? What heart space was I in? So just to give you some context, but also I should say communicating that without necessarily laying it all out for you either, because poetry is
Right.
sort of operates in that in between
Correct.
unknown. So the one poem that's in puro español I wrote when I was on my honeymoon in Cuba with my wife,
Mm.
and we had been in Cuba in Havana for about a week. And I remember one day I woke up and my I had dreamt in Spanish, and my initial
Mm.
voice in my head, when you wake up, you're thinking all these things. Oh, what am I going to do? I need to get coffee, whatever. All that was coming 100% in Spanish, which
Nice.
doesn't rarely actually, it actually almost never happens to me, to be honest. I might have words here and there, but not like puro 100% Spanish. So I remember my wife was still asleep, and I just got up, took my notebook, sat on the balcony, and I just started writing everything that was coming out of my head. And I didn't question a single thing.
Yeah.
And that poem is just like a good example of just whatever came to me at that moment. I pretty much wrote it down as I received it. Played with the line breaks here and there,
Sure.
but for the most part, that was like that feeling. That was what I was trying to harness in that moment, and I didn't tamper with that.
Oh, that's so cool. So you were in the land of Jose Marti, so it's like
Yeah, yep,
inspiration, man. Oh, that's
definitely.
really cool. That's really cool. I thought we could talk about a couple of the themes from the book. Obviously, a lot of them, are overlapping and all that. But obviously, I mean, I say obviously you're the one who wrote it, but I think I'm hopefully right on with
Yeah.
you know ideas of identity. You talked about pocho and
Mhm.
biculturalism, and visiting Mexico so often, visiting family. In the one called Broken Sestina, I'm sorry,
Mhm.
fill in the rest of the. I know it's just part of the title.
Broken Cecina as soundscape.
But I quote, but I've learned how to break different neighborhoods open and let oceans swim inside me, a mixtape of blood and knuckles swelling against these unbordered soundscapes. Something new in my stereo always playing. And I love that piece. I say the
Mhm.
narrator,
Yeah,
the what do they call it? Plausible
yeah,
deniability.
yeah.
this idea of, the narrator never mixed his past with our pleasures, something of the line.
Mhm.
Maybe didn't recognize Vicente Fernandez as much as Tupac,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Tell me a little bit about the soundscapes and how that, like the music, the mixtape, what it had to do with like identity.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, yeah, I mean, growing up in the Bay again, first generation, listening to the radio and sort of going to like Tower Records as a kid.
Tower.
I was always in the hip hop section. I also listened to rock and like punk rock at some point in my life, but it was started in hip hop and sort of that was always it's been the most consistent musical
Right.
thread throughout my life.
Right.
And I had my phase where I was listening to like the Clash and Black Sabbath and
Mm.
old 60s stuff, the Misfits, and I still like stuff like that, but it just never really spoke to me in the same way that rap did.
Mm.
Um, so I grew up, like my first CD was Tupac that again that I can recall in my head. And it was a single.
Mm.
And I was listening to this type of music. Meanwhile, my dad is a Mexican immigrant.
Mm.
But again, I lived in this very like unconventional Mexican home where like my mom wasn't there. And it's not like my dad was blasting ranchera music like a lot of
Mm.
my other friends' parents were. So I felt like I kind of lived in this weird space that didn't really exist. And like my friends to this day will give me shit, my Latino friends in my group chats will purposely send like Spanish corridos and stuff, and they'll be like, "Oh, Alan doesn't know anything about this," or
Oh
like
no.
he's probably listening to Snoop Dogg or whatever. And they'll just pick the most cliche rapper because they're just trying to make fun of me. And but I kind of started to take pride in that I felt
Mm.
like I existed like on a slightly different axis than a lot of what was around me.
Mm.
And I still do, and I try to embrace like just the weirdness of who we are and the inexplicable
Sure.
layers of our identity that like I don't listen to Spanish music really, and when I try I just don't really connect with it at all.
Mm.
So rather than trying to pretend and force myself into this way to be like socially accepted
Mm-hmm.
and being like, oh yeah, I'm going to listen to this music that has no like resonance with me, I clung even more strongly to what I did resonate with, which was
Mm.
predominantly rap.
Mm.
And I think the poem is kind of about that, of like being the Mexican kid in Mexican homes where it was like all Spanish at my friends' houses,
Mm.
and their parents were like making fun of me because I didn't know the Spanish music, So
Mm.
um, I think the poem comes from that experience, a lifetime of that. Mexicans, by the way, are like super, what's the word, like darkly humorous and like
Ah.
shit talky and not politically correct at all. So like you kind of have to have tough skin to grow up
uh,
in a Mexican culture because it's a lot of like making fun of you or calling you out, or if you don't do what's like expected, it'll be known.
I was just stunned when, growing up, when I learned my little Spanish, and my friend's mom from Guadalajara,
Uh,
she would call him gordo. And I was like,
yeah,
what that
yeah,
means,
yeah,
but it was
exactly.
with love, with so much love.
Exactly. It's all comes from a place of love, and I actually like really appreciated the way I grew up because yeah, like I feel like I'm like bulletproof to criticism because like your
Mm.
own mom will make fun of you. So it's like you kind of learn quickly not to take things too serious, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the love. I mean, the love is shown in a lot of different ways. The one which is called Veracruz
Mhm,
is, I think it's one of the shorter ones, but it's beautiful. There's the narrator, whether that was you or not, first time back to Veracruz,
mhm.
and
Yeah.
Abuelo was, showing him around. Do you like it? Said something like "Te gusta," and the answer was "Me encanta,
Mhm,
Abuelo." Right? Was that based on real
mhm.
life?
Definitely 100%.
Yeah.
As true to the memory as I could
Sure.
make it, right? So,
Sure.
uh, yeah, going back to a country where your family is from is a trip, especially when your
Mm.
grandparents never left that country,
Hmm.
because you just feel such a connection to the land and to the space.
Yeah.
And my grandpa like literally built a home
Right.
in the freaking mountains, like on these dirt roads. And going to see it for the first time is, coming from like the Bay Area, is just you just learn how to see the beauty in what you have and what other people don't have, I guess. And
Yeah.
also just like I think I learned in Mexico pretty quickly that the people who have the least have always given me the most.
Hmm.
Whereas in my experience in the United States is the people with the most always give me the least. So
Hmm.
kind of tapping into that beauty and that like that just purity of
Yeah.
of just existing and loving and sort of giving whatever you can, whatever scraps that you have.
Sure.
My abuelo really embodied that. He still does.
Hmm.
And the poem was sort of just an homage to that
Yeah.
sort of Mexican spirit of giving and loving and creating space and community and partying, and that's all part of the culture, right? On
Mm.
top of the shit talking.
No, that comes through very strongly there. You had the there's also the one that I really enjoyed. Google searching Mexico, and even just like the wordplay or the syntax, you wrote something about to be the always dash American cousin. I feel like, it could have been always the American cousin or something to that effect, but the always dash American. You talk a lot about, hyphens and Mexican American and stuff, and I thought that really came off in a really cool way, like, sound wise and also just I guess thematically. There's an inventory of cultural fragments is one of the poems.
Mhm.
Reference murals, poetry in Spanish with broken English translations, mezcal, crickets, frijoles con tortillas, and you end with flowers that wouldn't survive the North. Flowers that wouldn't survive the North. I was trying to figure out. I was wondering. I'm like, okay, it's not a capital N. It's not necessarily representative of the North.
Yeah,
I wonder what you're kind of going for with that image.
it was a mix. I also want to just say like frijoles and tortillas. I know that's hella cliche, but when I've had the privilege of being in Mexico for many times, and even living
Uh-huh.
there for half a year with my family, and just kind of like quitting my U.S. job and whatnot. And
Hmm.
again, that's a huge privilege that I have access to as a pocho.
Sure.
But people really do eat like just puro frijol and queso and tortilla for breakfast, and that's it. So
Mm-hmm.
shout out the Mexican, meals, because they're super simple but so freaking nourishing and
Yes.
satisfying.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So yeah, the poem is about all that. It's just a cascade of things that I remembered
Mm-hmm.
during my time there, one of my times there. And so my grandfather has never left or even visited. He's never even visited me or my family in
Ah.
California. And I was kind of thinking of him and people like him. And when I talk to him, I'm always like, Abuelo, like, why did you never visit? Why would you, how come you've never visited us? Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
34 years old now and you've never once, not for any holiday.
Right.
Whereas my abuela, sweet, sweet abuela, would come all the time when she could, and, she'd be with us. But my abuelo refused to. And I feel like there's some people in Mexico and just any parts of the world really that they're
Mm.
so entrenched in their reality that
Yeah.
they don't want to leave it. And I
Yeah.
don't think my abuelo would be comfortable in the US. Like, he's an old military dude, super indigenous features, like crazy wrinkled brown leathery tough skin, and he's like hunched over and barely walking, and he still goes to work.
Dang.
I think he just retired actually, but the dude was in his late 80s and he would still get
Oh,
up every morning and he would go like help people sweep the street.
dang.
He didn't even do it for money. He just did it because that was like the only thing he knew. And
Mm.
I don't think people like that can transition into the luxuries and
I see.
the sort of capitalistic, materialistic
Mm-hmm.
shallowness, honestly, of United States life. Like, they're just so ingrained. I don't think he would survive up here spiritually. I'm talking, right? Of
Yes.
course, so yeah,
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
like I have a deep respect for people that yeah, that grow up like that and sort
Mm-hmm.
of embrace that and don't want to escape that.
Man, I mean, there's an alchemy there. I thought it was a great line. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I would say, okay, it seems like maybe like wouldn't survive as in like, oh, the person's weak, but you definitely mean the other way around. Like it's not that,
For sure.
right? It just makes sense. Like there's a certain soil, right?
Hmm.
Like E40 would say, loyal to the soil, right?
Loyal to the soil. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
A great line. I don't remember what poem it was from. This idea of biculturalism. We come from Bone Thugs and
Oh
Selena,
yeah,
right?
definitely.
One of my favorites, if not my favorite, was Lucha Libre in two and a half
Mm.
parts, right? There's this idea of like, it starts with the idea of like the Mexican me, which I think a lot of us have thought about, like, like what if I lived in like the land of
Mhm.
my grandparents, great grandparents?
Yeah.
What if I grew up in Miami instead of LA? What if I grew up in,
Hmm.
that was just so cool. And it was broken up. I mean, as the title would tell you. You talk about, like you said earlier, like, you have so many family members in Mexico that it's like, it's a huge part of you. You've been there, it, but there's also like a quote, like a privilege of watching the Mexico US game from your couch,
Yeah.
and then quote, cheering for nothing and anything. I thought that was really, really cool. Just the idea of parts and hyphens I thought was so interesting. Fathers and sons, manhood clearly comes through. How to watch is the one we talked about, where this is another one of my favorites, man. The first half of the game. So it's basically the narrator watching was it a soccer game or a
Yeah, soccer.
Right. The first half is asking questions, reassuring easy questions so that you and Pops, or narrator and Pops, can talk. And the second really becomes like deep, like pensive, like the boundaries between, I guess, father and son. And then you reference the first wife and this there's a great line, the idea, something about the road that split in half, something to that effect.
Yeah,
so cool.
Appreciate it. Yeah, no, oh, my bad.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, one of the beauties of writing this book was like talking to my parents members about their stories. And I didn't even really know that my dad moved to the US, like I told you, from Mexico to the Bay. And the reason that he crossed the border legally was because a white Bay Area woman married him. And I was like, what the fuck? How come you never told me this?
Jeez.
So like that, how is that not a poem? That my dad had a marriage that I never knew about before my mom, and it was to this white American woman who was a citizen, and that's the only reason we ended up over here. So the poem really investigates that.
Yeah.
And then one of the other weird things that I learned while writing the book was that my mom, and this goes back to the other poem you mentioned about lucha libre and imagining life in Mexico.
Sure.
Is my mom had, when I was born in Redwood City, forged like fake papers that I was born in Mexico.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was a trip, because so many of my friends growing up would go to San Jose to get like fake papers in these basements and like to pretend that they were born here in the US. And I was born in the US, and my mom did the opposite in Mexico. And it just, I don't know, I feel like I've always lived in this like inverted reality and sort of like bizarro world compared to a lot of the people around me. And the book helped me like sort of tap into those narratives that I never really knew about, or maybe had heard once or twice as a kid and just kind of left alone. But now that I got older and I was exploring these spaces, I could dive like way more deeply into the poetry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so clearly manhood is a theme throughout, and it goes to the idea of biculturalism too. I mean, you talk about a poem being ready, like with your dad and his first wife. Like, what a poem! Like, come on, Chavez versus De La Hoya.
Yeah.
Right. 1996 is one of the poems. I mean, right. I'm not in any way a boxing expert, but I know Chavez is just revered for just being tough, right?
Definitely.
Like tough.
Yeah.
De La Hoya is seen as like, oh, pretty boy, right? And obviously he was really good.
Yeah.
But like, am I right that he never like I know him, right? He never
Yeah.
fully gained like the Mexican
For
boxing, right?
Definitely not, because he was a pocho. He was Mexican
Uh-huh.
American, and his shorts were half Mexican flag, half United States flag. And
Right.
Cesar Chavez was like a Mexicano from Mexico, known as like the warrior from Mexico, right? So, yeah, machismo is a kind of a disease, I would say, and I grew up around a lot of machista type of men and people, and I think the boxing and all that stuff is just like the perfect metaphor, especially if you grew up in that fighting other kids and like having to put on the gloves at a young age, and having older guys make you fight the younger guys, and then watching the fights with your dad and all his male friends because there was no women, and like all that environment. That's how I was raised for so long, and I never really reflected on it until I started writing poetry, basically.
Yeah.
I think that's why so much of it, I think, sort of organically just led me to these poems and these memories and these moments where I could sort of try to untangle all that mess and the beauty of it too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, a lot of the narrator in that poem about the fight, kind of basically comparing himself subtly to those trunks, to De La Hoya, half Mexican, half US and all of that.
Yep.
What a pretty poem, pardon the pun there, but it's called Pretty. And it's basically kind of like, I mean, this idea, I mean, we all know it as men, a lot of us, to be called gay, to be called gay was and maybe still is, but it was an insult, right? It was ignorant. It was but it was something that was said a lot more back in those days. And one of the poems talking about like, love among these adolescent boys is like shown through chest bumps and clowning on each other, but of course in italics,
Yeah.
not in a gay way,
Yeah.
right? I think probably maybe towards, I know you're a little younger than me, but there was that like the no homo. You remember that was the thing?
Yeah, definitely.
It's just gross and really, like trying way too hard. And I mean,
For
what,
sure.
what can you call besides homophobic?
Yeah.
It's so very interesting how you interrogate that on the page. And I can talk about it. That's what a lot of us grew up with in small ways and big ways and all that. Maybe lastly, the idea of just the innocence of youth and just ignorance that all of us grew up with in, again, small and big ways. What a great title, California Canto Funk.
Yeah.
It's funky, it's clever, just like the name. Shout out to E40. I think of canto like a song. And you ask the question, you say, wouldn't you at this age, wouldn't you eat tamales, play catch with cousins? Wouldn't you go to barbecues in Santa Cruz? And then you flip it to like, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we burn rubber, drink 40s? And then you reference a guy with a baguette, just eating a baguette and smoking a black and mild at the same time.
It's one of my favorite memories of all time in Berkeley. Is just some hood dude in the middle of the day, hella baggy, like saggy ass jeans, and was like a long ass baguette, and was just munching it like straight off, and then he would just take a rip of his blunt, and it was just like, again, this is like before there was like dispensaries and all that, and I just thought it was hell of a Bay Area moment.
That's like Nirvana. That's like Nirvana right there.
Definitely, dude. I was like, that guy wrote the blueprints of happiness right there. I also just want to let you know, California Canto Funk, again, this is just all the ways that hip hop seeps into my work in ways that aren't always, discernible immediately. Is that came straight from Outkast's, I want to say it was their playlist, Cadillac Music.
Yep.
And it was like this long ass word that was just like crunched into one.
Yes.
And I almost called the book that because I was like riffing off of that album where I was like, they had the Southern playlist of Cadillac Music, and I have California Canto Funk was my version of like, how do I get my spin, my remix, if you will.
Nice.
So yeah, I just kind of wanted to like allude to a lot of the muses and inspirations that we get as artists from other great artists, or from great artists, I should say. Those that inspire us to be creative and making it our own. I feel like that's kind of the core of what I wanted to communicate through the book.
Me and you, your mama and your cousin too. Oh man. The title poem, with the Piñata reference, of course.
Be defeated.
Are you there? Oh, can you hear me okay?
I don't know if you cut out or if I cut out.
Are you back? Can you hear me okay?
Hear you anymore?
Can you hear me okay? Is that better? Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yo.
Awesome, man. I was just gonna I just wanted to end with the Piñata, reference. And you have some great lines there, man. There's oh man, so good. Again, this idea of adolescence, and it's basically, quote, we went from smashing Spider-Mans to smashing institutions we can't see, getting our spins and tumbles from tequilas and Sierras, pretending to be ourselves but never trusting the brakes, a different kind of broken, a slower walking up, each morning becoming more monster, needing a harder sort of destruction. And this is idea of the piñata as, layers, and you end with basically like we're all made for beatdowns. I wonder if you could maybe end by just talking a little bit about, why the piñata, why that title?
Yeah, I feel like when I landed on that phrase or that image or just that concept, it felt revelatory for me, because at the core of many things that I was trying to do, I mean, this book has many cores, and I keep saying it at the core of this, but I think that multitudinous like reality is why I love poetry so much, because it isn't just one thing, right? And
no.
To me, the Piñata theory, like, sort of ultimately was this feeling and sort of symbol of everything being packed, all of our experiences, memories, upbringings, the neighborhood you grow up in, the your nationality, your citizenship
Mm,
status, your gender, your age, your blah blah blah, everything. It's all kind of crammed into our physical being and the way we move through the world and the way we're perceived by others. And it's like very colorful, very vibrant, right? Especially again, speaking as a Mexican American male from the Bay.
mm,
And I just kind of always felt like a lot of the kids that I knew growing up were sort of like set up in positions to be destroyed
mm.
more publicly or more easily or more celebratory in a way that was celebrated sometimes by like
Sure,
systemic forces,
sure.
as opposed to some of the other kids, that I knew or that went to my school or
Hmm.
that you see on TV or whatever it be. So the Pinata theory was really just that idea of how some of us feel built to be destroyed, or
Mm,
like when we do unravel, when we are sort of battered down and beat down publicly often.
hmm.
It's like a very violent spectacle. Beating a piñata up is like give a kid a
Yep.
stick,
Yeah.
watch him break the shit out of this thing, and then we're all clapping and cheering. The harder you hit, the better, the more encouragement you get.
Mm,
And then as soon as this thing explodes and bursts open and everything falls out, everybody suddenly scrambles and picks up all these, sweet, delicious or sour and
mhm,
sort of, everything, just all the mezcla of everything. And
mm.
then we start consuming it. And then it's kind of like, oh, well, that party's over. On to the next bastion, right?
Yeah.
Just that whole thing, it just felt so like appropriate for how I had felt growing up in many instances,
Mm,
and sort of the energy I was trying to communicate to people that maybe didn't grow up like that, or
mhm.
maybe had a more of a tender like entrance into writing, right? Like mine was a very
Yeah.
broken, fragmented
Mhm.
spillaging of self that I
Sure.
until I ended up at the place that I am now and in this book.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to make sure that people knew that that's where I was coming from, specifically
Mhm.
people like me that could read this book and
Yeah.
could feel that for themselves, and hopefully inspire them to write their own books
Yep.
or their own stories or share whatever it may look like.
And is there literally a more scary moment in life than when that kid is about to swing and there's another kid who's like in, right?
Yes.
And it keeps happening because I get it. The kid
Yeah.
wants to get closer. It's like, no, 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 back up, back up.
Yeah. Friendly fire.
Right. Man, thanks so much for writing the book, for the collection. It is so good. So many, it's topical, it's very singular to your particular experience, but it's also got those universal parts. And such a good read. So you're online now. You're extremely online. You're on Twitter. You're on Instagram. Again, that's Alan Chazaro, and it's Chazaro. Any other, anything else you want to shout out about yourself online, or where to find your
um,
stuff? Sorry,
Not
could I
as
ask you where would be a
yeah.
good indie bookstore maybe to buy your work?
Um, East Bay Booksellers.
Okay.
It's in Rockridge, and Walden Pond or Walden Books, I believe it's called, on
Okay.
Grand. Both of them are Oakland. I know they have the books. Pegasus in Berkeley
Hmm.
has the book, and support them regardless if they have my book or not.
Sure.
But those are ones that I know that they carry Pinata Theory.
Cool. Cool. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
No, thank you, dude, for the time creating this space, having this dialogue. It's very useful, I think, for artists and writers to reflect on these things. So,
I
and shout
really
out the
appreciate it.
Warriors, man. This is the Warriors
Right,
here. We're back. Curry's back.
man. What, 12
Stop
and
the
2?
Curry slander.
Yeah, right, man. Wow, 12 and 2 is it right now? 13 and 2, something
Yeah,
like that,
yeah, I believe so.
man. Yeah. How do you possibly root
Steamrolling.
against Curry? I'm a Kings fan, but go Steph, go Warriors.
Yeah, yeah.
Come on, Draymond, start shooting a little bit more. But anyways, stop letting go of every shot. What a
Definitely.
pleasure. Thanks again to Alan, and thanks everybody for listening. Pinata Theory is so good. Check it out, and check out any future projects from Alan as well. Thanks again, Alan. You're the man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Peter. Have a good night.
You too.
Adios.